The early morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Ridgeline, painting the training grounds in hues of gold and gray. Staff Sergeant Alina Brooks stepped off the transport bus, her boots clicking against the asphalt with a sound that carried authority even before she spoke. The crisp uniform fit her like a second skin, and her posture was perfect, shoulders squared, head held high, eyes forward. To the casual observer, she seemed like any other soldier arriving at a new post, but to those trained to read subtle signs of confidence, Alina exuded a presence that demanded attention. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, revealing a face marked not by softness but by quiet determination. Every movement was calculated, every gesture deliberate. She carried nothing extra, just the standard-issue rucksack, a tactical belt, and a journal clipped to her side, a notebook for observations and strategies. While many soldiers in her unit would flash smiles or engage in small talk to make a first impression, Alina kept her focus. She didn't need to announce herself. Her presence spoke volumes. Across the field, Sergeant Dalton Price leaned against a wall near the barracks, arms crossed, his usual smirk firmly in place. Price had been at Fort Ridgeline for nearly 3 years and had earned a reputation for arrogance that bordered on recklessness. He liked to dominate new arrivals, especially women in leadership roles, and he assumed this transfer would be no different. When he spotted Alina, he narrowed his eyes, the smirk never leaving his face. Well, what do we have here?" He muttered to himself, "This one's going to crumble before lunch." Price didn't notice the subtle ways Alina observed him, the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his gaze scanned her uniform with suspicion, the impatience in his stance. She made a mental note of him and his squad. The men surrounding him were equally cocky, their chatter punctuated with smirks and whispered bets about how quickly she would fail. None of them realized that she had been through environments far more intense than this training post, and that every detail mattered to her: posture, timing, reaction. Alina's arrival did not go unnoticed by the other soldiers. A few looked her up and down, making silent evaluations. Some guessed at her experience by the way she carried herself, while others simply saw a new recruit and assumed weakness. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken challenge, as if the field itself was aware that something significant was about to unfold. She walked with measured steps, scanning the surroundings, noting exits, the spacing between buildings, and the formation of the squad. Every detail mattered, and she cataloged it silently, methodically. As she approached the squad's designated area, Price straightened and stepped forward, his smirk widening. "Well, look who's decided to show up," he said loudly, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear. "Hope you're ready. It's going to be interesting having you here." His voice carried the familiar edge of condescension, meant to provoke. Alina paused briefly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her expression was neutral, unreadable, like calm waters concealing a strong current beneath. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she allowed him a few seconds of false victory. Price, mistaking her silence for fear or hesitation, chuckled and glanced at his squad. They all nodded subtly, clearly expecting some reaction, perhaps a stammered response or an apologetic greeting. But Alina had other plans. "Staff Sergeant Alina Brooks," she said clearly, her voice calm but firm, carrying across the small training field, "reporting for assignment." Her words weren't loud or performative, they were simple, precise, and deliberate. There was no hesitation, no unnecessary flourish. Yet the clarity and authority in her voice made even Price pause for an instant, though he masked it quickly with a scoff. The squad exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't anticipated her confidence, nor the ease with which she seemed to command attention without raising her voice. A few of the younger soldiers shifted nervously, unsure whether to treat her as a peer or a superior. Alina didn't offer them guidance yet, she was still assessing. Observing a team, especially one accustomed to arrogance and infighting, required patience. Price, unwilling to lose face, stepped a bit closer, leaning toward her. "So, Staff Sergeant," he said, voice dripping with faux friendliness, "I hear you've done some training with the Combatives program. Heard it's intense. Think you can keep up with us?" The emphasis was clear. This was a challenge. He expected her to flinch, to respond with self-doubt, or at least offer some timid acknowledgement of the hierarchy. Alina's eyes flickered to him for a brief moment, calculating. "I've kept up before," she replied evenly, "and I intend to keep up here." Her gaze swept over the entire squad, lingering on the strongest-looking members, the ones most likely to cause problems. She didn't smile. She didn't taunt. But there was an unmistakable undertone in her tone, a quiet assurance that she was prepared for anything. For the first time that morning, Price hesitated, the smirk faltering. There was a spark of unease in his eyes. He had seen confident soldiers before, but something about Alina's presence, calm, disciplined, unyielding, made him reconsider his assumptions. The squad felt it too, though they weren't ready to admit it. Alina didn't need to demonstrate skill yet. The field had already acknowledged her authority silently. As the morning briefing began, Alina maintained her vigilance. She listened carefully to the instructions, noting the specific challenges, the squad's tendencies, and even subtle lapses in the instructor's methods. While the others exchanged jokes or whispered complaints, she remained alert, absorbing every detail. There was an intelligence in her observation, a pattern-seeking awareness that suggested she was preparing for more than just a routine drill. By the time the briefing ended, the squad had accepted one uncomfortable truth. Alina Brooks was not like the other transfers. Price, still adjusting his ego, muttered under his breath, "We'll see about her." But even he knew, deep down, that underestimating her could be a serious mistake. As the soldiers moved toward the training grounds, Alina stayed slightly behind, walking at her own pace, scanning the layout, considering angles and opportunities, mentally mapping every possible scenario. She didn't need to assert dominance yet. She had patience, timing, and skill on her side. And she knew that in the coming hours, the squad would discover just how wrong their assumptions had been. The tension in the air was tangible. This was not just a new arrival. It was a subtle warning, a quiet storm moving across the field. Every soldier who had underestimated her was about to learn that presence, preparation, and precision could outweigh bluster, ego, and brute confidence. And in a place like Fort Ridgeline, underestimating someone like Alina Brooks could quickly become a costly error. The day settled into a rhythm as the squad prepared for the morning drills. Alina moved silently among them, observing, analyzing, yet never appearing intrusive. Every motion, every exchange between squad members was catalogued in her mind. She noticed small details, the way Price dominated conversations, the subtle hierarchy enforced by those who had spent years in the same unit, and the way younger soldiers deferred, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of habit. Price had wasted no time spreading his version of events. "She's a tiny transfer from Recon," he told anyone who would listen. "Don't expect her to last. Bet she'll crumble in the first obstacle course." His words were laced with arrogance, meant to elicit snickers and affirm his dominance. The squad laughed quietly, eager to watch what they assumed would be another failed arrival. None of them realized the depth of her experience or the precision with which she operated. Alina ignored the whispers and sideways glances, her focus absolute. She understood fully what she was dealing with, a group of men who relied on ego and intimidation to assert power. This would not be a challenge of brute force. It would be a challenge of patience, observation, and timing. Every mocking remark was a test, and every assumption they made about her skill or courage was a miscalculation. By mid-morning, the squad had gathered for their first real training session together, hand-to-hand drills, obstacle courses, and controlled sparring exercises. Price, ever the showman, strutted around, demonstrating techniques he expected Alina to fail at. "Watch closely, new girl," he called, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Try to keep up if you can." His tone was mocking, but the underlying challenge was unmistakable. The squad positioned themselves, ready to begin, while Alina assessed the field. Her eyes scanned the space, the distance between obstacles, the angles of approach, and the timing necessary for each drill. She catalogued every detail silently, her mind moving faster than her body at that moment. In combat, perception was often the difference between success and failure, and Alina knew this better than anyone. The first drill began. Alina moved fluidly, her actions precise, efficient, and deliberate. Every step was measured, every movement minimized wasted energy. Price, growing impatient, tried to distract her, shouting corrections and subtle jabs. "That's not how you do it. Watch me," he barked, exaggerating his motions. But Alina remained unaffected. Her focus never wavered, her awareness never diminished. The squad began to notice the discrepancy between expectation and reality. Alina was not faltering, she was not struggling. She was methodical, observant, and capable. Whispers began circulating among the soldiers, a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "Is she really that good?" One of the younger soldiers muttered, eyes wide. Price, catching the whisper, shot a glare, determined to maintain his dominance. By the end of the obstacle course, Price decided it was time to assert himself personally. He stepped in, blocking Alina's path during a maneuver and jostling her shoulder with deliberate force. "Think you can handle this?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. The squad formed a loose circle, some eager to see her fail, others unsure what to expect. The air crackled with tension, every eye on the two figures at the center of the field. Alina paused, a flicker of calm determination crossing her face. "I can handle it," she said quietly, her voice steady, carrying a subtle warning. Price misinterpreted the calmness for hesitation. He pushed harder, assuming that force would provoke fear. The squad leaned in, anticipation building. Some chuckled nervously, waiting for her to falter, while others simply watched, sensing that this was a turning point they hadn't anticipated. What Alina did next was almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. She shifted her weight, rooted herself, and absorbed the push without losing balance. In that instant, her focus became tangible, an aura of controlled strength that seemed to radiate outward. Price, expecting resistance or retreat, found himself slightly off-center. It was enough. The squad began to murmur among themselves. Their assumptions, long held, reinforced by ego and habit, were starting to crack. Alina's composure, the calmness in her eyes, and the precision of her posture communicated a silent but undeniable message. She was ready for anything. Price, blinded by pride and arrogance, did not recognize the subtle shift in power until it was almost too late. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours to those observing. Alina continued to execute every drill flawlessly, never once losing her rhythm or composure. Price tried repeatedly to provoke her, employing the tactics that had worked on every new transfer before her. He shouted instructions, mocked mistakes, and attempted intimidation through proximity. Each time, Alina absorbed the energy without reaction, countering with efficiency and poise. By mid-session, the squad's perspective had shifted. The younger soldiers who had whispered mockery were now exchanging nervous glances, uncertainty replacing confidence. The older, more experienced soldiers began to reconsider their earlier judgments, though none admitted it openly. Price, frustrated and increasingly aware that his ego might be challenged, decided to escalate. After a particularly intense hand-to-hand drill, he cornered Alina in the middle of the training mat, placing himself between her and the path forward. His hands gripped her shoulder roughly, pushing her backward with calculated force. "So, think you can handle me?" he taunted, loud enough for the circle of squad members to hear. His voice was not just challenging, it was daring her to prove herself. Alina's eyes met his, calm and unflinching. "I've handled worse," she replied, her tone neutral but carrying unmistakable authority. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't react with aggression. Instead, her posture remained firm, her body prepared for the inevitable escalation. The squad watched in silence, the air thick with anticipation. Some were excited, others were apprehensive. It was in these moments that Alina demonstrated a principle that Price and the squad would soon learn. Control and awareness were more powerful than intimidation. She didn't need to fight yet. She only needed to show that she was prepared, and the challenge had already shifted in her favor. Price, for the first time in years, felt a twinge of unease. He had assumed confidence equaled weakness, arrogance equaled vulnerability, but Alina was none of these things. By the end of the morning session, whispers had spread throughout the squad. "She's not like anyone I've seen," one soldier admitted quietly. "Careful, guys," another muttered. Price, still trying to maintain control, forced a smile, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Alina's arrival had changed the dynamics of the unit. She was not just a new transfer, she was a catalyst, a quiet storm ready to challenge assumptions and rewrite the rules. As the squad gathered for a short break, Alina remained calm, scanning the field and her team. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone was a reminder that underestimating her would be costly. Price, meanwhile, leaned against the wall, muttering to himself, plotting his next move. He hadn't yet realized that the real challenge wasn't winning a single drill. It was surviving the quiet, precise, unrelenting skill of Alina Brooks. By the time the soldiers returned to their positions for the next round of exercises, the air was electric. Each soldier carried a mix of anticipation, nervousness, and curiosity. Alina walked among them, observing, learning, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation that would define their first day together. The field was silent in a way that only tension can create, the kind of silence that precedes an event everyone will remember. And at that moment, no one, not Price, not the squad, not even the instructors, could predict what would happen next. All they knew was that Alina Brooks had arrived, and the old assumptions, the old hierarchies, were about to be shattered. The morning sun had climbed higher, turning the training grounds into a mix of bright light and sharp shadows. The squad assembled for the first real test of skill together, a series of close-quarters combat drills that would push their reflexes, stamina, and coordination to the limit. The air was thick with anticipation, and Alina Brooks moved among them with the same deliberate precision she had exhibited since arriving. Her eyes scanned every soldier, nodding posture, reaction speed, and even subtle tells, tiny hints of overconfidence, hesitation, or distraction. Price had positioned himself front and center, determined to prove his dominance. "All right, pay attention," he barked. "These drills separate the competent from the weak. Don't embarrass yourselves." He threw a casual glance at Alina, smirking. "And you new girl, try to keep up. Don't slow the squad down." His voice carried the usual blend of arrogance and condescension, designed to provoke her. The men around him chuckled softly, expecting a performance of hesitation or error from Alina. Alina didn't respond. Instead, she flexed her hands briefly, loosening her fingers, a small prelude to the precise movements that would follow. She had studied Price and his tactics, and she knew that his strength lay not just in his physical ability, but in the psychological edge he attempted to maintain. She would need to remain calm, measured, and always a step ahead. The drill began. Soldiers paired off, executing a sequence of hand-to-hand maneuvers, defensive stances, sweeps, strikes, and counters. Price immediately targeted Alina, moving with exaggerated confidence, attempting to provoke a reaction. "Don't freeze now," he taunted. "I want to see what you've got." He launched a series of aggressive strikes, expecting her to falter or respond rashly. Alina's movements were smooth and precise. Each block, each counter flowed naturally, guided by instinct and experience. She didn't overreact and she didn't display anger or frustration. Instead, she absorbed each motion, redirecting energy with minimal effort, leaving Price momentarily off balance. The men watching began to murmur in disbelief. She's good," one soldier muttered under his breath. Another nodded silently, eyes wide. Price noticed their reactions and scowled. "Keep your eyes on me," he barked, his frustration beginning to show. He had underestimated her calm focus, the way she moved with certainty and clarity, and now his ego was at risk. As the drill escalated, Price became more aggressive. He attempted to corner her, using his size and weight to overwhelm. Alina anticipated each move, pivoting smoothly, her center of gravity always controlled, her stance firm. With a subtle shift of her hips, she redirected his momentum, causing him to stumble forward slightly. The small slip was enough to make him angry, but not yet defeated. The squad circled closer, sensing the shift in power. For the first time, their mocking laughter had been replaced by tension and uncertainty. Alina didn't speak or show emotion. She simply continued the drill, methodically executing each movement with precision and control. Price, growing increasingly frustrated, attempted a bold maneuver, a push designed to knock her off balance entirely. Alina absorbed it with ease. Her body moved instinctively, redirecting force, and before anyone could react, she delivered a controlled sweep that brought him just a step too far forward. Price stumbled and barely regained his footing. The squad gasped, some exchanging glances of shock. No one had anticipated that Alina would counter his strength so effortlessly. Price, enraged by the slight humiliation, launched another attack, faster and more aggressive this time. Alina anticipated his intentions and sidestepped, using his own momentum against him. He lunged again, and again she redirected him with minimal effort. Within moments, the entire dynamic of the drill had changed. Price's attempts at dominance were failing spectacularly, and the squad's perception of Alina shifted with every precise move she made. By mid-session, Alina had neutralized not just Price, but the men he had intended to impress with his show of force. With subtle redirection and careful technique, she maintained control, demonstrating skill that was far beyond the squad's expectation. It was as though she had a sixth sense for movement, anticipating actions before they occurred, reading every micro-expression, every shift in posture. Price, now breathing heavily and glaring, refused to concede. He shoved her roughly during a maneuver trying to provoke a reaction. Alina's response was immediate and flawless. With a quick pivot, she absorbed the push, shifted her weight, and executed a precise arm lock that caused him to stumble forward. The squad froze. None of them had expected such controlled, efficient technique from the tiny new transfer. Three of Price's closest allies, seeing their leader faltering, moved in to assist. They charged simultaneously, intending to overpower her, but Alina had anticipated this. With a series of swift, fluid movements, she redirected each man's momentum, placing them on the ground in a controlled and efficient manner. The field fell silent. Shock rippled through the squad. Price's smirk had vanished, replaced by disbelief. "How?" he muttered under his breath, unable to comprehend how quickly the situation had turned. The other soldiers scrambled to regain composure, but Alina didn't give them an opening. Every step, every motion was deliberate. She remained calm, measured, and in total control. The instructors observing the drill had paused, recognizing the skill on display. Alina wasn't just performing techniques. She was teaching by example, demonstrating control, awareness, and precision in a way that spoke louder than words. The squad, once full of arrogance and confidence, was now confronted with undeniable evidence of her capabilities. Price, humiliated and frustrated, finally stepped back, breathing heavily. He had been defeated not by brute force but by skill and calm execution. The squad, previously dismissive, now regarded Alina with a mix of awe and fear. Their assumptions, that she would falter, that she could be intimidated, that she could be mocked, had all been shattered in less than 10 minutes. Alina remained silent, scanning the field, allowing the squad to absorb the lesson. She didn't gloat and she didn't boast. Her presence alone conveyed authority, competence, and mastery. Price, realizing that his ego had been thoroughly dismantled, struggled to maintain his composure. He had underestimated her and in doing so had revealed his own weaknesses. By the end of the drill, Alina had not only completed the exercises flawlessly, but she had also demonstrated something far more important: leadership through skill, not intimidation. The squad had been humbled, though they would not admit it openly yet. Price, still reeling from the encounter, muttered under his breath, "We'll see, she hasn't won yet." Alina, however, was already several steps ahead. She had observed, assessed, and executed with precision. She knew that the real challenge was not just the drills, they were only the beginning. The lesson for the squad was simple: underestimating her would be a costly mistake. Skill, control, and awareness were far more powerful than ego, arrogance, or brute strength. As the squad regrouped for a short break, Alina took a moment to reflect silently. The field was tense, filled with a mixture of admiration, fear, and uncertainty. She had arrived at Fort Ridgeline as an unknown transfer, but by the end of the morning she had changed the dynamics of the entire unit. The arrogance, the mockery, and the assumptions were all in the past. The squad would soon learn that their new Staff Sergeant Brooks was not just another soldier. She was a force they could neither ignore nor underestimate. The sun had reached its peak, turning the training grounds into a harsh, bright arena. Dust swirled lightly in the warm breeze, carrying with it the tension of the squad, who now eyed Alina Brooks with a mix of disbelief and unease. Price, still trying to salvage his pride, squared off in the center of the mat. He underestimated her before, but now the heat of the afternoon, the glare of the sun, and the watchful eyes of the squad seemed to sharpen every detail in his mind. And yet, he remained blind to the storm about to hit. "Come on, new girl," Price sneered, stepping toward her with deliberate aggression. His shoulders rolled forward, his stance wide and commanding, an effort to intimidate. "Show me what you've got." His voice carried across the field, echoing off the buildings and amplifying the challenge to the squad surrounding them. Several of his allies mirrored his stance, their expressions cocky, certain that they could control the situation. Alina didn't respond with words. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, calm yet piercing, tracked every movement, noting every microshift in balance, every hint of overconfidence. She had already mapped his body language in her mind, anticipating his attack before it began. Her breathing remained steady, her center grounded, her body prepared for the inevitable collision. In that moment, the entire field seemed to hold its breath. Price lunged first, a broad, aggressive shove meant to destabilize her. Alina's reaction was instantaneous. She absorbed the force, her body shifting slightly to redirect momentum rather than resist it outright. His energy flowed through her, and instead of opposing it, she guided it, a subtle pivot, a sweep of her foot that caused his center of gravity to falter. Within seconds, Price stumbled forward off balance, and the first gasp escaped the lips of the squad. Before Price could recover, Alina executed a quick wrist lock, leveraging his momentum to bring him fully to the ground. It was controlled, precise, executed with surgical efficiency and without excess force. The impact wasn't violent, but it was definitive, an unmistakable message of skill over arrogance. The squad froze, eyes wide. Shock replaced laughter, and disbelief began to seep into even the most confident members of the unit. 3 soldiers, Price's closest allies, reacted instinctively. They rushed forward, assuming that numbers would overwhelm her, that brute strength could correct what skill had undone. Alina's gaze shifted, calm and unshaken, her body a coiled spring ready for the next sequence. She anticipated their approach before they fully committed, calculating angles, weight, and timing in a fraction of a second. The first soldier reached her, swinging a heavy punch meant to land squarely. Alina sidestepped effortlessly, redirecting his momentum with a controlled arm sweep. The man stumbled, caught himself, and tried again. Each motion she made was fluid, efficient, and economical. Within seconds, he was on the ground, his balance lost, unable to continue. The second soldier charged from another angle, attempting a tackle. Alina pivoted smoothly, using the man's forward drive against him, guiding him to the ground with minimal force. He landed in a heap, dazed more by the suddenness of the movement than the strength behind it. The squad was silent. No one had anticipated such a rapid, effective response to multiple attackers. The third man, realizing what had happened to his comrades, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, a fraction long enough for Alina to seize the opportunity. With a precise step and a shift of weight, she executed a combination of leverage and control that brought him down beside the others. Within 10 seconds, all 3 men lay on the ground, momentarily stunned, while Alina remained standing, her breathing steady, posture impeccable, eyes calmly scanning the circle of shocked soldiers. Price, still on the ground, scrambled to his knees, horror spreading across his face. How did you?" he stammered, trying to find words that could explain what had just occurred. But words failed him. His arrogance, his ego, his sense of invincibility, All had been shattered in seconds by someone he had dismissed as insignificant. The squad surrounding them was frozen. Some dared not breathe too loudly, afraid to disturb the precision of what they had just witnessed. Others stared openly, disbelief etched into every line of their faces. Alina's control, her efficiency, her ability to neutralize multiple trained soldiers without reckless aggression, had flipped the script entirely. What had been a scene of mockery and expected failure had become a lesson in humility, executed in perfect silence. The field remained still for several moments, the only sound the shallow, uneven breathing of those on the ground. Alina finally shifted her weight slightly, a subtle motion that broke the tension, yet carried authority. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood there composed, a living demonstration of skill, control, and focus. In the quiet aftermath, whispers began circulating among the squad. I didn't think she could do that," muttered one soldier, disbelief lacing his tone. "Did you see that?" said another, his voice trembling slightly. Even the instructors observing from the sidelines paused, recognizing the mastery displayed. Alina had not only defended herself, she had demonstrated a level of skill that few in that unit had ever encountered. Price, finally regaining a semblance of composure, rose slowly to his feet, his face red with a mix of anger and humiliation. He tried to reclaim his authority with a scoff, but the squad's eyes were no longer on him. They were on Alina. Every instinct he had relied upon to maintain dominance had failed spectacularly. The arrogance that had defined him for years was now exposed as vulnerability. Alina's eyes swept the circle, noting each soldier's reaction. She recognized the subtle fear, the hesitant admiration, and the dawning respect. None of them spoke. None dared challenge her further in that moment. Her demonstration had been quiet, efficient, and decisive, a lesson delivered without drama, without anger, and without unnecessary force. The result, however, was undeniable. She had earned a presence that could not be ignored. As the instructors approached, Alina stepped back slightly, allowing them to assess the situation. Their faces reflected a mix of shock and approval. One of them nodded subtly, recognizing that the display had gone beyond training. It was a masterclass in control, awareness, and tactical skill. The squad, still on edge, began to understand a critical truth. Alina Brooks was not merely competent, she was extraordinary. By the time the session ended, Price had retreated to the sidelines, nursing his bruised ego and struggling to process the lesson. The squad gathered their composure, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Alina had arrived as an unknown, underestimated by everyone, and yet in mere seconds she had transformed the hierarchy of the unit. Mockery had given way to respect, arrogance to caution, and chaos to controlled focus. As Alina walked calmly from the field, her movements precise and measured, she cast a glance back at the squad. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction in humiliation. There was only awareness, control, discipline, and an unspoken message. Underestimate her at your own peril. The soldiers would carry the memory of those seconds for a long time, each man forced to reconsider what true skill and authority looked like. In that moment, Fort Ridgeline had witnessed a subtle revolution. The rules of hierarchy, dominance, and perception had been rewritten in mere seconds by someone they had assumed they could push around. Alina Brooks had arrived quietly, but she had commanded attention in a way that words or boasts never could. And the squad, still processing what had happened, would never see training, or her, the same way again. The dust settled over the training field, swirling lazily around the scattered soldiers who were still processing the events of the past 10 minutes. Price sat on the ground, his chest heaving as he tried to regain composure, the edges of his ego fraying with every passing second. His allies picked themselves up one by one, their expressions a mix of disbelief, frustration, and embarrassment. The squad's murmurs filled the air, but no one dared speak directly to Alina. She stood calmly, scanning them with her sharp, observant gaze, as if evaluating their reactions rather than celebrating her own success. The squad sergeant, Lieutenant Marcus Reynolds, finally approached the scene. He had observed the entire confrontation from a distance, his brows furrowed, his mind processing what he had just witnessed. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice carrying authority. He looked directly at Alina, studying her posture and expression. "Staff Sergeant Brooks, I believe we need to clarify something to the squad." Alina nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that she was ready. She didn't need to speak, her presence alone conveyed confidence. Price, still struggling to stand fully upright, glared at her with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Clarify what?" he spat, though his voice lacked the usual edge. Even he sensed that the balance of power had shifted. Lieutenant Reynolds addressed the squad. "This isn't a typical transfer," he began, his tone measured but commanding. "Many of you assumed that Staff Sergeant Brooks would be another average arrival, someone to test, someone to underestimate. What you just witnessed should already give you a hint, but let me make it clear." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the soldiers. Staff Sergeant Alina Brooks is a former Army combatives instructor. She has trained soldiers at multiple levels of close-quarters combat, and her record speaks for itself. She served in a Special Operations Support Unit, and her experience in high-pressure, high-risk environments is exceptional. Additionally, she is certified as a Level IV close-quarters defense specialist. The squad collectively froze. Murmurs rippled through the group, a mixture of shock, awe, and a touch of fear. Price's mouth hung open slightly, his earlier bravado completely stripped away. He had underestimated her, not only her skill but also the depth of her experience and the authority she carried inherently. The realization was staggering. Alina, who had remained calm throughout, finally spoke. Her voice was measured, precise, and carried a quiet weight of authority. "I am not here to prove anything beyond my ability to lead and to train. Arrogance and ego will not work against skill, control, or preparation. The lesson for today is simple. Do not underestimate anyone based on appearance, size, or assumptions. Respect is earned through competence, not intimidation." The squad exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their heads, ashamed that they had doubted her. Others, particularly the younger soldiers, looked on with a newfound sense of respect. The dynamic of the unit had shifted irrevocably in the course of a single morning, and it was clear that Alina Brooks had rewritten the rules of engagement for everyone present. Price, now fully upright but visibly shaken, attempted to regain some semblance of control. I didn't know," he muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. He stopped, realizing that no words could adequately undo the humiliation he had suffered. Alina's gaze met his, steady and unyielding, silently communicating that his previous behavior had been unacceptable. Lieutenant Reynolds stepped closer to Alina. "I want you to understand, squad, that underestimating her was a mistake, a costly one. Staff Sergeant Brooks will be guiding training from now on, and your cooperation is not optional. You will learn from her, not because she demands it, but because she demonstrates what true skill and leadership entail." The squad absorbed this, some nodding slowly, others remaining silent but attentive. Price's expression shifted from frustration to grudging acknowledgement. He was still angry, his ego bruised, but he was also beginning to understand that Alina's authority was absolute, not something that could be challenged through arrogance or physical intimidation. Alina took a step forward, addressing the squad directly now. "Every drill, every maneuver, every challenge we face together requires focus, discipline, and teamwork. Bravado and ego are liabilities, not strengths. Today, you've learned that underestimating someone can have immediate consequences. Tomorrow, and every day after that, you will see that preparation, skill, and composure always prevail over arrogance and assumptions." The impact of her words was immediate. The younger soldiers, who had laughed and whispered during the morning drills, now listened intently. Even the more seasoned members of the squad began to internalize the lesson. Alina's calm authority had shifted the unit's perception, not through intimidation, but through demonstration of skill and unwavering confidence. Price, attempting to salvage his dignity, took a hesitant step forward. I guess I underestimated you," he admitted, his voice low but sincere. "I didn't realize, I didn't know your background." Alina's eyes met his, unwavering, and she replied simply, "Then now you know, and you'll act accordingly." The squad, sensing the shift, began to settle. The hierarchy within the unit had subtly realigned. Alina was no longer the new transfer. She was the standard-bearer for skill, composure, and leadership. Price, though humbled, was beginning the process of adjusting to a new reality, one in which respect was earned through capability, not status or intimidation. Lieutenant Reynolds clapped his hands lightly. "All right, everyone. Let's reset and prepare for the next phase of training. Staff Sergeant Brooks will oversee the exercises. Listen carefully, follow her guidance, and pay attention. What you saw today is just a glimpse of what's possible when skill and discipline are applied correctly." The squad moved into position for the next round of drills. The atmosphere had changed entirely. Where once there had been arrogance, mockery, and anticipation of failure, there was now cautious respect, focus, and a recognition that Alina Brooks was not to be taken lightly. Her arrival had been quiet, but her presence was undeniable, commanding attention in a way that reshaped the unit's dynamics entirely. As the squad began the exercises under Alina's watchful eye, the men could not help but reflect on their earlier assumptions. Their laughter, their bets, their whispered predictions of failure, all of it had been based on superficial judgments. The lesson was clear. True competence is not always obvious at first glance, and it cannot be faked or intimidated. Alina observed the squad carefully, offering subtle corrections, guidance, and demonstrations when necessary. She did not chastise unnecessarily. She simply modeled precision and skill, expecting the soldiers to match her pace. Her presence created a new standard, and even Price, though reluctant, began to follow her lead. The dynamic had shifted completely. What had started as mockery and doubt was transforming into a foundation for discipline, focus, and teamwork. By the end of the day, the squad had absorbed the full weight of the revelation. Alina Brooks was no ordinary transfer. She was a seasoned, highly trained, and precise leader, whose abilities could not be dismissed or mocked. The morning's confrontation had shattered assumptions. The reveal of her credentials had solidified respect, and the squad's perception of leadership had been irrevocably altered. For the first time, Price understood something vital. Respect is earned through demonstration of skill, composure, and authority, not through ego or intimidation. The squad, too, had learned that misjudgment could have immediate consequences, and that underestimating a comrade or a leader could lead to humiliation and defeat. Alina, calm as ever, observed the unit as they completed the exercises under her supervision. She remained focused, attentive, and unflinching, a quiet force of competence and authority. The soldiers who had doubted her, mocked her, or assumed weakness were now forced to reconsider every assumption they had made. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field, Lieutenant Reynolds spoke quietly to the squad. "Remember this day. Today is a lesson not just in technique, but in respect, awareness, and humility. Staff Sergeant Brooks has shown you what true skill and leadership look like. Take it seriously." The squad nodded, silently acknowledging the profound impact of the morning's events. For Alina Brooks, the day was only beginning. She had demonstrated her skill, revealed her credentials, and earned the squad's attention. Now, the real work, training, discipline, and the transformation of the unit would continue under her watchful eye. And the soldiers, for the first time, realized that they were not merely facing a new transfer. They were witnessing the quiet, precise authority of someone who had been underestimated by nearly everyone, and who had proven, in mere moments, that true competence could not be ignored. The afternoon sun was fading, painting the Fort Ridgeline training grounds in shades of gold and orange. Dust hung lightly in the air, disturbed by the movements of the squad as they repositioned themselves under Staff Sergeant Alina Brooks' watchful eye. The energy of the morning's confrontation still lingered, a mix of shock, awe, and lingering tension. Even the seasoned soldiers could not shake the memory of how quickly she had neutralized Price and his allies. Alina gathered the squad in formation, her posture commanding attention. She did not speak loudly or shout, she simply projected focus and authority. The soldiers instinctively straightened, their earlier arrogance replaced with alertness and quiet apprehension. Every man in the unit knew that the lessons of the morning were far from over. Alina was about to show them that skill and discipline were inseparable. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice calm, precise, yet carrying a weight that demanded respect. This morning's exercises were not just about technique, they were about awareness, anticipation, and control. Every misjudgment you made cost you. Every assumption you made about me or each other was a liability. Her gaze swept over the squad, landing on each soldier momentarily, reinforcing her words with presence. Price shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, his pride still bruised. "Are we going to do more drills?" he asked, attempting to mask lingering embarrassment with a question that sounded casual. Alina didn't answer immediately. Instead, she observed him and the others, assessing whether they were ready to absorb the next level of instruction. "Yes," she said finally, "we're going to correct your mistakes. And make no mistake, this will be harder than what you've faced before. Those who cannot keep up will find themselves falling behind. Every movement matters, every second counts, and hesitation will be punished, not with anger but with consequences." Her tone was steady, but the words carried authority that left no room for argument. The squad moved into position for the next set of drills. This phase was designed not merely to test strength or speed, but awareness, reaction time, and teamwork. Alina demonstrated a series of advanced maneuvers, defensive counters, rapid redirection of momentum, and controlled takedowns, executed flawlessly. Her movements were precise, fluid, and deliberate, a visual lesson in mastery. The squad watched intently, recognizing that imitation without comprehension would be futile. Price attempted to take the lead, trying to reassert dominance by pushing himself ahead of the others. Alina's eyes followed his movements, calm yet piercing. With a single gesture, she corrected his approach, guiding him through the proper technique and positioning. Her correction was subtle but firm, demonstrating skill without condescension. Price's frustration was evident, but he obeyed, realizing that resistance would only highlight his earlier failures. The squad followed Alina's lead with mixed results. Some soldiers adapted quickly, mirroring her movements and beginning to understand the principles behind her methods. Others struggled, overcompensating or reacting too slowly. Alina observed each carefully, noting weaknesses and strengths, offering corrections with a calm precision that left no room for argument. "Attention," she called sharply, halting the group mid-drill. "You are not learning this properly if you rely solely on speed or strength. Technique and timing are more important than force. Anticipate, adjust, and execute with precision." She demonstrated again, moving with flawless efficiency, taking her time yet completing each motion in perfect form. The squad watched, taking in every nuance, realizing that true skill was far more than brute effort. Price, determined to redeem himself in his own eyes, attempted a maneuver he had relied on for years in training exercises. Alina's eyes tracked him, and with a subtle step and a shift of her weight, she redirected his momentum, demonstrating once more that arrogance and reliance on outdated tactics could lead to failure. Price stumbled slightly, a flush of frustration spreading across his face. The squad, now more attentive than ever, began to internalize the lesson. Alina's training sessions extended well into the late afternoon, blending intense physical drills with lessons in awareness, observation, and decision-making under pressure. Soldiers were pushed to their limits, not with cruelty, but with precise, demanding instruction that left no room for shortcuts. Mistakes were corrected immediately, with calm explanation, ensuring that every lesson was understood and applied. By the early evening, the squad was exhausted. Muscles ached, sweat-coated uniforms, and the sun had begun its descent. Yet there was a noticeable change in their demeanor. Where arrogance and mockery had once dominated, now there was focus, humility, and a growing recognition of Alina's authority. Respect had been earned through action, not words. Price, though still struggling with pride, approached Alina cautiously. "Staff Sergeant, I get it now," he admitted quietly. I thought we could, I misjudged you." Alina nodded, acknowledging his honesty without further comment. She didn't need to reward him with praise. The recognition of error was already part of the lesson. The other soldiers began to speak among themselves in hushed tones. "I can't believe how fast she moves," one said. "She made it look effortless." Another added, "And she didn't even shout or lose her cool once. It's like she's always 5 steps ahead." Alina's presence had transformed the squad's perspective not just on her, but on themselves. They now understood that discipline and focus were as essential as physical strength in determining success. Lieutenant Reynolds approached Alina as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You've done more than I expected," he said quietly. "The squad's perspective has shifted completely. They understand respect and discipline in a way they hadn't before." Alina acknowledged him with a small nod, her focus never wavering. She knew the day was far from over. The true test of her training would be in the weeks to come, as the squad applied these lessons in more complex, high-pressure scenarios. As the soldiers gathered for their final debrief, Alina spoke again. "Remember this day. Remember the lessons, the drills, and the consequences of misjudgment. What you've experienced is a fraction of what proper training can provide. Discipline, awareness, and respect are not optional. They are essential for survival and effectiveness." Her words were deliberate, leaving no ambiguity about her expectations. Price, now fully subdued by the morning's events and the afternoon's lessons, muttered under his breath, "I never thought I'd say this, but she's earned our respect." The others, silently acknowledging the same, began to understand that the dynamics of their unit had changed permanently. As the squad marched back to the barracks, the fatigue in their bodies was tempered by a growing determination. The humiliation of the morning had given way to a sense of purpose, guided by the precise and unwavering example of Staff Sergeant Alina Brooks. Each soldier carried with them not only physical exhaustion, but also the imprint of a lesson in skill, authority, and humility that would shape their approach to every challenge ahead. Alina walked slightly ahead of the squad, her movements controlled and deliberate. The soldiers trailed behind, silent but attentive, each internalizing the day's lessons. The training grounds, which had earlier been a theater of mockery and misjudgment, had transformed into a classroom of discipline, skill, and respect. As night fell over Fort Ridgeline, the soldiers prepared for rest, their minds still processing the day's events. Alina's presence remained the focal point of their thoughts, not just for her skill, but for the quiet authority she exuded, the clarity of her instructions, and the undeniable truth that underestimating someone based on appearance or ego was a costly mistake. The day had been long, intense, and humbling. The squad had learned that true leadership and respect were earned through demonstration of skill, composure, and precision. Alina Brooks had not only proven herself in combat and training, but she had also reshaped the unit's understanding of discipline, hierarchy, and teamwork. And in doing so, she had ensured that the lessons of the day would not soon be forgotten. The sun rose over Fort Ridgeline with a harsh, cold clarity, casting long shadows over the training grounds. The squad gathered early, still buzzing from the lessons of the previous day. Alina Brooks stood at the front, her posture unyielding, eyes scanning the group with the precision of a predator observing its environment. This was not just another drill, this was a test of cohesion, trust, and the ability to act under pressure as a unified unit. The previous confrontations had shaken the squad's assumptions, but Alina knew that respect earned through singular demonstrations of skill was only the beginning. Now, the real challenge was to see if these soldiers could work together effectively under her guidance, using the lessons she had drilled into them: awareness, discipline, and precise execution. "Today," she began, her voice calm but carrying the weight of command, "we move beyond individual skill. The drills from yesterday were about you. Today, it's about all of you working as a unit. Any hesitation, miscommunication, or assumption will cost you. The squad shifted uneasily, aware that this was a higher level of challenge than anything they had faced. Alina laid out the exercise, a simulated tactical scenario designed to test coordination under stress. Multiple targets would engage the squad simultaneously, requiring them to respond, prioritize, and execute with precision. Missteps would be costly, not just in simulated damage points, but in the integrity of the unit and its cohesion. Price, still humbled from previous encounters, straightened. There was no bravado in his posture, only a tentative determination to redeem himself and regain some measure of competence in the eyes of Alina and the squad. The others followed suit, their confidence tempered by the memory of being neutralized with surgical efficiency the day before. The squad moved into position. Alina observed silently, letting them organize themselves before stepping in. She knew that this would reveal more than just physical skill. It would expose trust, decision-making, and the ability to act under uncertainty. The scenario was complex, designed to strain every member's limits. As the exercise began, simulated gunfire and alarms echoed through the training ground. The squad reacted, some more instinctively than others. Initially, confusion surfaced. Soldiers moved without coordination, duplicated efforts, or left gaps in coverage. Alina, observing closely, noted where hesitation and miscommunication arose, waiting for the precise moment to intervene. "Stop," she called after a particularly chaotic sequence. The squad froze mid-movement and Alina walked among them, scanning the formation. "Your timing is off. You're moving individually, not as a unit. Awareness isn't just about anticipating an enemy, it's about anticipating your team." Her voice was calm, precise, and carried an undeniable authority that made even Price straighten with attention. She demonstrated a series of maneuvers, showing how a team could respond cohesively, using controlled motions, communication, and positioning. "Notice how I shift weight and guide movement. Each of you has a role, but it's not isolated. One misstep affects the whole team. Coordination is everything." The squad watched, internalizing not only her technique but the rhythm and timing required for flawless execution. The exercise resumed. This time, the squad moved more deliberately, following Alina's guidance. The simulated threats came faster, more complex, but the soldiers adjusted. Price, now moving cautiously, matched his actions to the flow of the unit rather than acting independently. His earlier arrogance had been replaced with a recognition of the necessity of teamwork, and he began to apply the lessons Alina had taught with exacting attention. Alina's eyes scanned constantly, correcting minor misalignments, adjusting spacing, and fine-tuning communication. Her corrections were precise, never overbearing, and always delivered in a way that reinforced the squad's understanding rather than embarrassing them. Under her guidance, the unit began to operate as a cohesive entity, anticipating each other's moves and supporting one another's actions. Minutes turned into an intense hour of drills. The simulated scenario escalated, with multiple threats converging on the squad simultaneously. Soldiers moved in near-perfect synchronization, covering each other, redirecting force and maintaining awareness. Alina's influence was unmistakable. Her earlier demonstrations of skill had instilled confidence, but it was her guidance in teamwork and trust that now ensured their success. Price, now fully immersed in the exercise, caught himself redirecting a fellow soldier's momentum during a simulated takedown, a reflex born from Alina's instruction. The realization struck him that true leadership and competence were about guiding, supporting, and reacting as a unit, not asserting dominance through force alone. For the first time, he felt that the lessons he had mocked the day before were beginning to take root in his mind and actions. Alina observed the squad's evolution with quiet satisfaction. The unit was learning to anticipate, communicate, and execute under pressure. Mistakes were still occurring, but they were now minor and quickly corrected, a testament to the integration of discipline and trust she had instilled. The squad was beginning to understand that skill without teamwork was incomplete, and that leadership was as much about enabling others as it was about personal excellence. As the exercise reached its climax, multiple simulated attackers engaged the squad simultaneously. Soldiers moved with confidence and cohesion, covering each other, redirecting threats, and completing objectives with precision. Alina's presence was evident, but her interventions were minimal. She had trained them to operate independently while still functioning as a unit. The transformation was striking. The squad that had mocked and underestimated her now executed a complex, high-pressure scenario almost flawlessly. When the final simulated threat was neutralized, Alina called the squad to attention. Sweat-coated uniforms, muscles ached, but the sense of accomplishment was palpable. The soldiers, once divided by ego and arrogance, now stood together as a cohesive unit, their respect for Alina and for each other solidified. Today was not about skill alone, Alina said, her voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. It was about trust, communication, and cohesion. You have proven that you can operate as a team, but remember, complacency is a threat as dangerous as any simulated enemy. You must maintain discipline, awareness, and respect at all times. Price, standing quietly at the edge of formation, nodded. His earlier frustration had transformed into a determined focus. He had learned humility, trust, and the value of following rather than attempting to dominate. The squad, absorbing Alina's words, understood that these lessons were not limited to drills. They applied to every operation, every decision, and every challenge they would face. Lieutenant Reynolds approached Alina, his expression a mix of admiration and relief. "You've done more than I anticipated," he said quietly. "They've not only learned to respect you, but they've learned to respect each other and understand the value of cohesion. This will make a difference beyond training. It will make them a more effective unit." Alina nodded subtly, acknowledging the praise but remaining focused. She knew that true mastery was ongoing. Today had been a step, not the final destination. As the squad moved back to the barracks, their pace was measured but purposeful. The earlier arrogance, hesitation, and lack of cohesion had been replaced with confidence, trust, and respect. Alina walked slightly ahead, a quiet force guiding them, her presence both reassuring and commanding. The lessons of the day, the hard work, discipline, and trust required, would remain with the soldiers far longer than any individual drill or demonstration of skill. For the first time, the squad understood that Alina Brooks was not just a highly skilled soldier or instructor. She was a leader who transformed those around her. Her training, her discipline, and her ability to instill trust and cohesion had reshaped the unit's dynamics completely. The soldiers, now aligned, focused, and humbled, were ready for the challenges ahead, guided by a leader who had earned their unwavering respect. And as the sun set behind Fort Ridgeline, casting long shadows over the exhausted but transformed squad, Alina's calm, unwavering gaze promised that the lessons of skill, discipline, and unity would continue, shaping them into a team that could withstand any challenge together. The final morning at Fort Ridgeline dawned crisp and clear. The squad assembled early, the air buzzing with quiet determination. Gone were the murmurs of doubt, the whispers of mockery, and the arrogance that had once defined the unit. Each soldier now carried the weight of yesterday's lessons, and the memory of Alina Brooks' unmatched skill and authority had settled firmly into their consciousness. Today would be the culmination, the ultimate test of the transformation that had begun the day she first stepped onto the training grounds. Alina stood at the head of the formation, her posture calm yet commanding. She scanned the squad, noting subtle changes in stance, expression, and readiness. There was a marked difference in the way they carried themselves. Eyes alert, shoulders squared, movements deliberate. Even Price, once so cocky and dismissive, now stood with a quiet focus that spoke volumes about the respect he had finally earned, not only for Alina, but for his own capacity to grow. "Today," Alina began, her voice measured and authoritative, "we put everything together: skill, awareness, teamwork, and discipline. This exercise is designed to test not only your individual abilities but your ability to operate as a unit under pressure. Every mistake will be noticed. Every hesitation will have consequences. But if you execute properly, you will demonstrate the full potential of this team. The squad moved into position, each soldier aware of their role. Alina had designed a multi-stage scenario that combined physical challenges, tactical decision-making, and high-pressure simulations of threats. There would be no room for error. Every step, every maneuver, and every decision would be critical. As the exercise began, simulated enemy forces approached from multiple directions. The squad responded immediately, each soldier moving with precision and confidence. Alina's voice carried instructions only when absolutely necessary, but her presence alone ensured coordination and focus. It was as if her authority had become a gravitational force around which the unit now moved in synchrony. Price moved with unusual efficiency, directing his fellow soldiers when appropriate and following orders without hesitation. The lessons of trust, humility, and teamwork were fully internalized. Each soldier covered their partner, redirected threats, and communicated without unnecessary noise. The chaos of the morning drills seemed a distant memory, replaced by a unit operating with near-flawless cohesion. Alina's eyes scanned constantly, anticipating potential errors before they occurred. She intervened only when necessary, correcting positioning or refining technique with minimal effort. Her influence was evident, but she allowed the soldiers to act independently while reinforcing the cohesion she had instilled. The result was a team capable of adapting and reacting under pressure, guided by her precise standards. The exercise intensified. Simulated threats increased in speed and complexity, requiring split-second decisions and coordinated responses. Soldiers executed tactical sweeps, neutralized targets, and repositioned seamlessly. Alina's earlier demonstrations of individual skill had laid the foundation, but now the emphasis was on unity, communication, and trust. The squad moved almost as one organism, each member anticipating the next, adjusting to the flow of action with remarkable fluidity. Price encountered a particularly complex scenario, multiple attackers converging on his position, while a fellow soldier required assistance. Drawing upon Alina's instruction, he didn't act alone. Instead, he coordinated, communicated, and executed the correct sequence flawlessly, neutralizing threats while supporting his teammate. For the first time, he understood that true strength was not in dominating others, but in enabling the success of the group as a whole. Alina watched this unfold with quiet satisfaction. The squad had evolved beyond expectation. Where once they had been fractured by ego, arrogance, and misjudgment, they now demonstrated trust, competence, and cohesion. The transformation was complete, not because she forced it, but because she guided it with precision, discipline, and authority. The final stage of the exercise was the most challenging. Simulated threats surrounded the squad, requiring rapid adaptation, split-second decisions, and flawless coordination. Soldiers moved with confidence, covering each other, neutralizing threats, and adjusting seamlessly. Alina's guidance was subtle, her presence a stabilizing force that allowed the unit to operate at peak efficiency. When the last threat was neutralized, the field fell silent. Soldiers stood, breathing heavily, uniforms dust-streaked and sweat-soaked, but their expressions reflected pride, focus, and accomplishment. The transformation was undeniable. The squad, once divided by arrogance and mockery, had become a cohesive, disciplined, and highly capable unit under Alina Brooks' guidance. Alina stepped forward, her calm authority filling the space. "You've completed the exercise," she said, her voice steady, precise, and carrying the weight of command. "What you've demonstrated today is not just skill, it's discipline, awareness, trust, and unity. This is the standard you must maintain. Complacency is the enemy. Respect, focus, and preparation are your weapons. Never forget what you've learned here." Lieutenant Reynolds approached, his expression one of pride and relief. "You've done something remarkable," he said quietly. The squad's transformation is complete. They've internalized your lessons, your standards, and your approach. They're no longer just a unit, they're a team. Alina nodded, her focus unwavering. She knew the work was ongoing, but the day had achieved a milestone in the squad's development. Price, standing slightly apart, finally met her gaze. "Staff Sergeant, I can't believe I'm saying this, but thank you. I didn't understand before, but now I see. You've taught us more than I ever imagined possible." Alina's eyes softened slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of his honesty. "Respect is earned," she replied simply. "Not through words, but through action. Remember that and continue to apply it every day." The squad gathered, listening intently as Alina summarized the lessons of their journey: discipline, skill, cohesion, trust, and the importance of humility. They understood that each challenge, each drill, and each correction had been a step in shaping them into a capable, unified force. Where once arrogance and doubt had dominated, now respect, focus, and confidence prevailed. As the sun set over Fort Ridgeline, casting long shadows across the training grounds, the squad prepared to return to the barracks. Their movements were deliberate, coordinated, and confident. The lessons of the past days had transformed them, not just in skill, but in perception, attitude, and teamwork. Alina Brooks had not only proven herself as a leader and instructor, but had fundamentally reshaped the squad's approach to every challenge they would face. For Alina, the day marked not an end but a confirmation. The squad had been tested, humbled, and trained under her precise guidance. They had absorbed the lessons, embraced the discipline, and internalized the standards she had demonstrated with unwavering skill and authority. Her presence, calm yet commanding, had earned their respect, trust, and loyalty. The soldiers understood one undeniable truth: Alina Brooks was not just another transfer, another instructor, or another officer. She was a leader whose skill, composure, and authority could not be underestimated. The lessons she had imparted would remain with them far beyond the training grounds, shaping every action, decision, and operation in the days and years to come. As night fully descended, Alina surveyed the squad one last time. They were no longer the same soldiers who had arrived days before, divided by ego and arrogance. They had been forged into a cohesive, disciplined unit capable of trust, precision, and coordinated action. Alina's quiet, relentless authority had transformed them completely, and the legacy of her training would endure. And in that moment, Fort Ridgeline bore witness not just to skill, but to leadership, discipline, and the power of respect earned through action. Alina Brooks had arrived as an underestimated newcomer, but she left as the undeniable force that had changed the squad and everyone who witnessed her, forever.